Welcome to the world of music. I'm Morton Gould. When I was very young and very unknown, I attended the first performance of a composition of mine called Chorale and Fugue in Jazz. It was the first time that any of my scores had been performed by a major symphony orchestra, and the conductor on that occasion was Leopold Stokowski. I am not unique in this because countless composers of every school from every country have found Stokowski ready to champion their works, to infuse them with the dynamic spirit that pervades everything he does. This man's track record of first performances and pioneering achievements in every sphere of music is nothing less than fantastic. In fact, I would venture to say that there is hardly a composer around today that has not been helped and inspired by Maestro Stokowski. And so, it's a double pleasure to greet Leopold Stokowski today, not only in appreciation of his contributions to music generally, but in great personal friendship and admiration. Maestro, welcome to the world of music.
Thank you.
May I ask you whether, talking about my first performances with you and that of my colleagues, you have obviously done so many of young composers' works. Has this been conscious on your part, or has this just been part of a natural curiosity about?
No, I think it's a part of the 20th century life. You see, in my opinion, music is all the time evolving into new directions. And during the first half, and now in the second half of the 20th century, we have very new ideas and new techniques in music. The new techniques are necessary to perform the older or the new ideas. And this is, to me, fascinating because it's part of life as we live it today all over the world. Because when I say all over the world, music is obviously international language. So I notice that wherever I conduct, for example, I'm behind the Iron Curtain somewhere conducting, but I look over the orchestra and the concertmeister's there and the solo oboe there and the solo flute is there, and I don't know what country I'm in, and it's not necessary because music is international in its expression.
Now, on the word international, from a creative point of view, would you say though that, or would you agree that although it might be international technically, but it has its roots in national vernacular?
Yes, of course, every country has its own folk music, its popular music, yes. And the folk music seems to grow out of the earth. One can scarcely think that anyone composed that music as we compose today on paper, because it's not paper music. It's real music. It's the music of sound. It's the music that people sing and dance to when there's a ceremony in their house or in their village or wherever country, wherever they live. And this folk music is extremely important and gives a quality to the music of the country. In America, there is a great amount of folk music, and the same way in all the countries of Europe, particularly in Ukraine, where I used to go to conduct. The amount of folk music there is amazing. It's the same thing in Asia and all over Africa. So the folk music gives the character to the music of each country and its individuality, and it has its own charm too.
Would you say that the symphonic composer, the symphonic creator, the so-called serious creator, takes this as raw material and transforms it, and that's what makes somebody called, let's say, an American composer or a French composer, etc.? I mean, do you see a very direct relationship between the complex creative act, the conscious creative act, and the folk and popular material?
A composer naturally expresses what's inside of him, in his inner life of the mind and the heart and the soul, and it cannot be otherwise. A composition is almost like a self-portrait of the composer. For example, Bach his music tells us what kind of man he was. It even tells us something about his deep religious strain in his character. And the same thing would be about any composer, Debussy or Shostakovich or anyone. It's a self-portrait in tone and not in paint.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's a distinction between so-called contemporary music and music written in the 20th century?
Oh, that's a... Thank you. Do you mind saying that one again? I don't understand.
Well, the idea of music, of so-called contemporary music, and music written in the 20th century, I think, in a sense...
Oh, I understand you now. Yes, thank you. Well, the contemporary music, Mozart's music was contemporary of his time, the formality and the beauty of living of his time. So really, not only is all music a self-portrait of the composer, but it comes out from the kind of life he lived in at that period, and so it's contemporary. And so now we are in the second half of 20th century, and the music that is being composed today in the 20th century is an expression of how the composer reacts to the life around him, where he is living, how he is impressed by other people, all the difficulties and pains he has, and all the joys he has. It all goes into his expression, as all art does. Not only music, but painting, sculpture, architecture, everything is an expression of time and place.
And you feel that there are many ways of expressing that. What I mean by that, Maestro, is we live at a time now when so much of our musical creative direction is involved with, as an example, electronic means, with very, what we call, for want of a better word, far out approaches.
What do you mean by far out?
Well, I'm using that the way it's used generally. For me personally, I suppose far out would mean something that is not far in. I mean something that is not.
In other words,
something that is away from common procedures or from traditional attitudes.
Unconventional.
Yes.
Well, why didn't you say unconventional?
I didn't think of the word, quite honestly.
All right, yes. Well, now your question, please.
Now, that this being that we live in a time when so much of our so-called contemporary music is involved with this facet, to go back to the unconventional or far out.
Yes.
Do you feel that from a creative point of view, though, that there is still validity in the tonal approach and in the so-called orthodox approach?
What do you mean by validity?
That one can be creative. I have my own opinion on this. I'm very curious to find out what you say because of your experience.
Well, tell me your opinion first, and I'll tell you mine afterwards.
Well, is that the condition for an answer?
No conditions. But your question,
well,
please.
My feeling is that that one can use fantasy and rhapsody and creativity in any kind of medium. That whether one uses dishpans or conventional instruments and so on, one can create something.
Yes.
And that it goes. I mean, there are many streets in music to walk, and it's quite a large estate creatively for a composer to explore. I was just curious whether you agreed with the fact that one could write supposedly or relatively conservative music today and still contribute something.
This has to do with two kinds of persons, the composer and the listeners. The composer naturally expresses what's inside of him. Just as you cannot take out of your pocket something that's not already in your pocket, so a composer cannot, or any artistic creator, cannot take out from his inner soul anything that's not already in it. So he expresses it, in our case, through music. That is what is his contribution to life today. But the listeners, they are quite different. Some of them will respond to his idea of life and music, and some will find it meaningless. It just depends on how the listener has brought to life his own ideas and particularly his own emotions in response to the life around him.
Now, I think following that through, Maestro, what is, could you comment on the idea of random music, the idea of a composition that has in it, that involves the performer as a
Do I
creator?
understand what you mean by random, first of all? What is random music? I know my idea,
Yes.
but what is
not
your...
organized in the orthodox sense. In other words, not specifically spelled out through notes, but giving the performer a freedom.
I doubt if any great
chance.
music is orthodox. A creative artist of any kind is unorthodox naturally. And by random music, I presume you mean that the players or singers make their music as they feel it at
That's
the
right,
moment,
you know.
in a free way. Well, that's
They can go
improvisation.
Forwards or backwards or start in the middle.
But
Yes,
that's improvisation,
that's right.
and a wonderful part of music. Now, one of the greatest improvisers was Bach, and I always feel that today we have, to a great extent, lost the art of improvisation, and I hope it will come back, and if the random gentlemen can make it come back, we are grateful to them.
In other words, I gather that implied in this is the development of the performer in the sense that he must be more than merely somebody who copies something or who just reacts like a machine to something, but who involves himself now.
In one word, he must be creative.
Yes.
That's all.
Yeah.
Yes. It's very
Because in
simple.
a way, great performance is always, isn't it?
Yes, but when you have two or more persons making music at the same time, and they're all creative in all different ways, it might become very complex. And that's what happened with the music of Ives. His Fourth Symphony, which has recently been performed, has just those qualities. Many things and many rhythms, many harmonies, many melodic lines are sounding at the same time and are completely individual. So I think that Ives, who in my opinion was a very great artist, also was a random composer.
Yes. Because on that, Maestro, in the performance of a work like the Charles Ives Fourth Symphony, I imagine that no one performance is ever like the other, is it?
Well, that's true of all music, in my opinion, because human beings are in different moods on different days. And that is one of the charms of music, that it always sounds fresh and new.
In the field of electronic music, of making a musical sound through technological means, do you feel that at some point or other this will actually replace the live musician?
No, I don't think so. But it could be parallel with it. They can both exist at the same time. And of course, all this depends on the reaction of humanity to any form of art. For example, Shakespeare goes on century after century because enough people are thrilled by the beauty of his poetry. The same thing is true of the music of Bach. It goes on. Or of Dante, the Commedia of Dante lives because enough people find it extraordinary in imagination. If people do not, if humanity does not find any form of art interesting, it disappears. It doesn't say it's not good or it is good or bad. It just disappears because not enough people are interested. But I have immense faith in the judgment in the long run of humanity. I believe that men and women and children in the long run realize what is true and beautiful in art and what is not.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you feel that there was a collective sensitivity on the part of the human.
It cannot be otherwise, because it might be that certain persons who think they are superior might tell humanity, you should like this and you should not like that. And there are such people who are saying that. But men and women take no notice. If they're thrilled by nature or art, they are thrilled by it. And nobody can tell them not to be thrilled by it because it's just natural to them. And that is what is great about the future of humanity on this little planet on which we are now sitting. It will go on and it will become finer and greater because enough people are going to make it finer and greater.
Now, Maestro, you've mentioned this planet, and being that we've sort of come down to earthly things again, do you feel that the economic pressures, the economic surroundings of musical life today help or hinder the creative spirit?
Have nothing to do with it whatever. And the quick way to see that is that Ives, the great American composer, was a rich man, and Schubert, who was a great composer, an enormously great composer, practically starved all his life. So it means that money and all those physical things have nothing to do with it. It's what's in the soul of the composer or the creative artist of any kind.
Mm-hmm. It has to do, in other words, with a particular talent, which
Yes.
has nothing to do with the economic status.
No.
Maestro, I know that you are not very sympathetic to talking about conducting, because I think you feel that this is something that is technical and that in a sense you cannot talk about, you must do, which of course applies to all parts of music. But may I just ask one or two very general questions that I think we'd all be interested in. Does your attitude toward an orchestra, does your technique change with an orchestra that you have not conducted before, as a guest conductor?
When I'm a guest conductor? Oh, of course it does, yes. Because when I am conducting the orchestra, which is for the moment mine, like the American Symphony Orchestra is at this time, the players all know me personally, and we know certain technical questions which do not have to be explained at all. It's understood. Whereas if I go to another orchestra, very often I go to a country where I do not speak the language in that country. That makes no difference because the music has its own language. But there, the technical questions are different, and in every country, the quality even of the players is different. For example, in some countries, the brasses are wonderful, but the strings are poor. In the other countries, the strings are great, and the brasses are less good. In other countries, the woodwinds or the percussion instruments are extraordinary. It depends on the country, on what led to the building up of art in that country and of the orchestras, and all this has to be taken into account naturally. But about conducting, I think that we have a great difficulty ahead of us, and that is that all over the world today, and I travel very much and like to travel in different countries, I notice coming now to the fore many new orchestras. Some of them are completely professional, some are completely amateur, and some are partly professional, partly amateur. And the players in those orchestras are often extraordinarily great players. And in the amateur orchestras, the persons love their instruments. They do some other kind of work during the day, but at night they go home and practice their instrument, because that is one of their greatest delights in life. But they cannot find good conductors. We are running short of really talented conductors. And that is going to be difficult all over the world today. And I wish we could see a way to develop the conductors, because we have talented conductors, but they're not given enough opportunity. We must find a way to give them opportunity.
Well, you say that we have many talented young conductors, and you say opportunity. You mean in terms of there having opera house to conduct in, orchestras to work with.
That helps,
etc.
but imagine a young man or one young woman who has talent for the piano. That person can rather easily find somewhere a piano to practice on and develop their art. With the violin, it's a little more difficult, but also can be done. But with orchestra, it's extremely difficult because a major orchestra of about 100 players is a very costly instrument, and managers, those terrible people, managers, they don't want to give an unknown conductor the opportunity. They say we shall have no one in the house and we shall lose money and all these kind of arguments. So what can the young conductor do? It's all over the world, this problem, and I don't yet find a good solution for it. But I see clearly the problem.
Talking of the orchestra, Maestro, do you feel, let me make a statement, I think that the orchestra, as we know it, is really an incongruous kind of combination of instruments in terms of balances.
Yes, I agree with you. Much in the orchestra is back in the 18th century still. For example, trombones. They have not developed. Well, the earliest pictures I know of trombones are in BC. How many years? That is 21, 22, 24 centuries back. The trombone still plays with a slide the same way as it did at the time. But when we perform, for example, that delightful overture, William Tell of Rossini, and the storm scene comes, and the trombones must play very fast. They cannot play fast because they must make a space between each note. Otherwise, it's a mere slur. So, unfortunately, we have to play that storm a little slowly to accommodate the trombones. If the trombones had valves,
yes,
then they could play as fast as you wish. That is the trombone. Now the trumpet, if the trumpet wishes to make a glissando, a gliding sound from one note to another, like the trombone can do it easily, trumpet cannot do it easily. You ask trumpet, he said, I'm very sorry, I can't do it. But if he had a slide, he could do it. And so it goes on. So many of the instruments are far behind the times of today and could be made better. And in other words, the modern orchestra needs modernizing.
Needs modernizing, yes. Yes. Well, I agree with that. In a sense, I think that the wind band is a more consistent kind of grouping, winds and brass, than winds, brass, and strings, and there's always the problem of balancing and weights
and also the problem of pitch.
And pitch, yes.
For example, in some countries they tune to A440, in others 435. But the instruments don't like this difference of pitch. And the players are blamed for bad intonation. It's not their fault. It's the pitch of the instruments.
Maestro, I can't resist asking you a question on the
You should never resist temptation.
Well, right.
You have a temptation.
Of transcription, your transcriptions of Bach and so on. As you know, purists feel that one should not transcribe from one medium to another.
The puritanical people have a perfect right to their opinion. If they like to be puritanical and not have much fun in life, let them be that way. But when it comes down to transcriptions of the music of Bach, I admit that I am a culprit. But the worst culprit of all was Bach himself. He made more transcriptions than I ever made because he admired so much the Italian school of his, particularly Vivaldi.
Yeah. Maestro, everybody talks about the youth of today. I think this has been going on for thousands of years. Everybody always talks about the younger generation. But do you have any thoughts or comments about the younger generation?
I notice very much in the newspapers and on the radio about delinquency. And of course there are young boys and young girls who unfortunately have probably bad home conditions, and they're out in the streets and they do terrible things. But for any one of those, there are thousands of wonderful young boys and girls today. And I know so many of them. In the American Symphony Orchestra, which I conduct, they're mostly young men and young women of immense talent. So I believe that this young generation, so talented and so full of life and humor, they're going to make the life of today all over the world. And it's going to be a great life because it will be created by those young boys and those young girls.
In other words, you feel that this is a strong generation.
Definitely, yes. Education is helping that. Better living conditions, better food,
yes.
Travel, particularly travel, because they go to other countries and they see, after all, they're just the same as we are.
Yes. They seem to be involved with what's going on around them.
All over the world.
And knowledgeable, as you say, and sensitive
yes.
to their place in the world and
so the conditions of life all over the world tomorrow are going to be even better than today. And in many countries they're good today, but not in all, of course. We must give to those countries who have poor conditions, we must give from our luxury, our mass production, what we have, much food, we should give.
Share our riches.
Share, that's right.
Well, I think that's a very optimistic and humane note to end this discussion on. Thank you, Maestro. It's been really an honor and rewarding experience to visit with you. When the history of music in the 20th century is written some years from now, the name Leopold Stokowski will rank high on the list of men who helped shape and inspire that history. Certainly, the term genius is in order. When we think of this man whose unrelenting energy and dynamic vitality have enriched the music progress of our time, and whose consummate mastery of the musical art has made him truly a unique figure in the world of music. This is Morton Gould.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.